Carol will take a roll call in a minute, but does it appear we have quorum to your knowledge? It does.
You do have quorum, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. So we'll begin. Good morning, everyone. Bonjour. Thanks for joining us. Welcome to the Audit Committee meeting.
Your voice is gone. Your voice is gone.
My voice is gone?
Oh, it's back. Yes.
Okay.
Now,
Sorry. I apologize. Thank you. Thank you, Eli. Conducted via Zoom again, still. Just a reminder to keep your microphones muted until I call on you to speak. And as we are all used to, if at any point committee members or council members want to speak, you should use the raise hand Zoom function, which you probably know where it is in the Zoom controls, usually at the bottom of the Zoom window, near the audio controls. Carole, merci beaucoup, Carole, pour tout ton travail. The committee coordinator and I will be watching for those cues, and the usual 5-minute speaking limit, time limit will apply. To my knowledge, we have no public delegations signed up for any of the agenda items. Thank you for acknowledging that, Carole. However, members of the public are always welcome to provide written comments, which are always circulated to members of council. And I will remind everyone that we are being live streamed, and this will be archived on YouTube. Before we proceed, Carole, could you please do a quick roll call, please?
Yes. Councillor El-Shantiri.
present.
Councillor Darouz.
Here.
Councillor Hubley.
Here.
Councillor Kavanaugh.
Here.
Vice Chair Meehan.
I'm here.
And Chair Klutze.
Présent. Merci, Carole. And welcome all. And before we begin with the items on the agenda, I certainly want to offer a special welcome to our new Auditor General. Bonjour, Madame Goujon. Today is the first Audit Committee meeting for the new Auditor General, Nathalie Goujon. I want to take a moment to welcome her to this committee and to this important leadership role at the city. Aujourd'hui, c'est la première réunion du comité de vérification pour la nouvelle vérificatrice générale, Nathalie Goujon. Je veux certainement prendre un moment pour lui souhaiter une bienvenue cordiale au comité et à cet important rôle de leadership à la ville d'Ottawa. Ms. Goujon impressed us at the hiring panel with her expertise, her experience. I think I speak for the Audit Committee when I say how much we look forward to working with her and her team to keep moving ahead with the important mandate of the Office of the Auditor General. C'est un plaisir pour moi de travailler avec elle depuis qu'elle est entrée en fonction. Nous avons eu plusieurs discussions pour que je puisse bien comprendre ses objectifs. Elle propose des initiatives, une perspective sur les fonctions qui est aux attentes des gens de la ville. Donc, bienvenue, Madame la vérificatrice générale. Welcome, Madame Auditor General. Today, the committee will review the Auditor General's approach and the timeline for a quality assurance review for revised terms of reference for the Audit Committee and the proposed amendments to the audit recommendations and the implementation process. On va examiner une approche pour le calendrier de la vérificatrice générale, l'assurance de la qualité, le mandat du comité de vérification et des modifications proposées au processus de la mise à jour des recommandations. The Auditor General will also bring forward her interim work plan for 2021 and report back on 8 audit follow-ups. Et je veux certainement profiter de cette occasion pour remercier le personnel et la direction de la ville qui travaillent avec la vérificatrice générale sur ces rapports de suivi. I want to thank city staff, management, who work alongside the Auditor General on these follow-up reports. And with that, we will now turn to the agenda. Colleagues, any declarations of interest? Seeing none, thank you. The minutes, confirmation of minutes for our meeting of November 24th. Are these confirmed?
Carried.
Carried.
Carried. Thank you very much. And we will go through the items. Item number 1, the Office of the Auditor General, Quality Assurance Review and External Assessments. There are no presentations or public delegations. Are there any questions? Is this item? I am seeing nothing. No one signaling. Is this item carried?
Okay.
Thank you very much. Item number 2. Before we begin, Mr. O'Connor, Mr. City Clerk, could you provide a few comments regarding the procedures on this matter, please?
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and I appreciate the opportunity to address what I'll refer to as some procedural niceties with regards to this report and some of the others that are following on this first audit committee for the new AG. I'm aware, Mr. Chair, that you have a number of experienced members on your committee, and particularly you've got a number of committee chairs on your committee, so I refer to them as procedural hawks. So when we look at item number 2 on the agenda, it's talking about the implementation update process with some proposed modifications. And when I look at the recommendation and I look at the report in itself, it talks about the governance report, the midterm governance report that just took place in December. And it's making recommendations with regards to discussion over committee terms of reference, work plans, those sorts of procedural issues. Now, Mr. Chair, you're very familiar, as are your members, that under normal circumstances, Council will only deal with procedural issues for its standing committees, its subcommittees, and itself twice a term. So it'll be at the beginning of the term with regards to governance matters and at midterm governance, which just took place in December. The AG has rightfully put something before you describing the background of it arising from that meeting. So in the normal circumstances for Council to revisit or committee to revisit an issue, you would usually use the waiver of the rules of procedure with regards to that in order to revisit an issue that Council and committee has addressed. In this instance, I'm not recommending that, Mr. Chair. I'm recommending that you use the procedure and the common law process that we use much less, which is that you are receiving new information. I always like to read the last part because Mr. Mark will get angry if I forget it. That in the opinion of the chair or mayor might have led to a different result at the initial vote. So the initial vote was in December of 2020. The new information, Mr. Chair, is supplied to you by a new Auditor General who has new professional recommendations for the committee and Council to consider. And I think it would be within your power to rule that, yes, this might have led to a different vote in December if you had that new information in front of you. So, Mr. Chair, for those reasons, if you accept it, my view is that this is new information and you can proceed to deal with all of the reports in front of you. Thanks.
Mr. O'Connor, thank you very much. Always appreciate your counsel and your advice and with respect to these matters. So on the item number 2 and the audit recommendations implemented update process, I am so ruling that this item can be heard by the committee, and if that is the will, carried by simple majority of the members of the committee present. So we will hear the item. There are, again, no delegations. Are there any questions? Councillor El-Shantiri, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. O'Connor. Mr. O'Connor, if I understand that the term of reference you're making reference to is still the chair or the mayor still has the ability, based on some new information, to bring item to their committee. Is that correct?
That's correct, Mr. Chair.
So that will not change that process, correct?
That is correct, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you, Mr. O'Connor, and thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to clarify this.
Thank you, Ms. Councillor El-Shantiri. Any other questions on this item number 2? Why don't I put that on Do Not Disturb? I don't know if you heard that, but my jabber was ringing there. Any other questions on item number 2? Is the item carried, please?
Carried.
Carried. Thank you. Thank you very much. Merci, Madame la Vérificatrice Générale, pour ces deux rapports-là. We are now on to item number 3, the Office of the Auditor.
I think we just lost the chair. Councillor Meehan, would you mind taking over while we try and get the chair back online? Oh,
Okay, if I knew where we were, Carol, just a sec.
we were going on item 3. However, I do see the chair is back here. His name is there, but I don't see him.
It's still frozen.
Yeah, he's frozen. Yep, just a sec. I've got to go into my calendar and get my agenda. Do. Someone just tell John he should turn his video off. Okay. Okay. So we are at item number 3, the Office of the Auditor General, Interim Audit Work Plan, if that's correct. So
That is correct.
So at this point, I would ask, now I've never been a committee chair, so I don't know what I'm actually going to do right at this point. Natalie, Madame Auditor General, would you be explaining exactly what you're planning to do in this when it comes to your work plan?
Absolutely, I have a presentation to make on this matter.
Okay. Well, shall we begin that, or should we wait for the chair to return?
I'll leave that to you and Carol, I believe, to.
I think I'm going to defer to Carol on this because she really is the expert.
So the chair is trying to get back on. You could proceed with the presentation in the meantime and continue chairing until Councillor Klutze is back on.
Well, it is very clear that the chair is aware of the Auditor General's work plan. So if it's okay with the rest of you, then we will continue, and the Auditor General can lay out her work plan, and he'll join us when he can. But she will not be explaining or telling us anything that he does not know at this point. So, Ms. AG, it's yours.
Thank you, Chair. J'aimerais premièrement prendre un moment pour remercier les membres du comité de la vérification, les membres du conseil, ainsi que les membres de la haute direction pour avoir pris le temps de me rencontrer, d'avoir parvenu leur pensée et pour leur accueil chaleureux. J'aimerais aussi prendre un moment pour remercier les membres de mon équipe pour leur appui pendant ma période de transition. I'd like to briefly just say a quick thank you to the members of the Audit Committee, to members of Council, and to members of the senior leadership team for having taken the time over the course of the past couple of months to meet with me and to share their insights, as well as for their very warm welcome. I'd also like to say a quick thank you to my team for all of their assistance during my transition period. Carol, if I can get you to share the presentation, please. Prochaine diapositive, s'il vous plaît. So firstly, I'd like to provide a little bit of background information. I'm sure many of you are aware that the Auditor General is responsible for assisting City Council in holding itself and its administrators accountable for the quality and stewardship over public funds and for the achievement of value for money in municipal operations. This is accomplished through the independent execution of audits aimed to help identify and mitigate risks, improve the control environment, and to continue to improve the efficiency and effectiveness of city operations. So what I'd like to do is quickly walk you through the 5-step process that we took in the development of our interim audit work plan. The first step is updating our audit universe, and perhaps maybe I could give you a quick Coles note as to what an audit universe it is. Essentially, it represents all auditable entities, all of the areas within the city that we could audit. And this includes the services provided by the city, programs, activities, and functions, which collectively contribute to the achievement of the city's strategic objectives. The second step in our process is that of documentation review. So we reviewed the risk assessments that were conducted by all 9 city departments, draft official plan, the City of Ottawa Strategic Plan for 2019-2022, the most recent financial statements, as well as the 2021 operating and capital budgets. We reviewed past audits conducted by the office, as well as audits and audit work plans from other municipalities. We also reviewed fraud and waste hotline reports that we received to determine whether or not there were any other areas that we wish to dive into a little deeper. The third step in our process is that of consultation. And so we met with members of council as well as members of the senior leadership team in order to get their insights with regards to strategic and organizational objectives, risks, anticipated changes, as well as potential challenges to the operating environment. We met with the external auditors to discuss audit coverage of high-risk areas and to minimize overlap and duplication. This particular item is extremely important at the moment as we want to ensure that we're not adding fatigue, audit fatigue to the city administration in the midst of a pandemic. The last 2 steps of our process is that of risk assessment and prioritization. Engagements were selected and prioritized based on risk, the assessment of which was completed using information gathered from the audit universe, the documentation review, and the consultations that I just walked you through. The underlying premise of a risk-based approach is that areas of higher risk require greater oversight. Accordingly, in carrying out our audits, greater weight is given to the examination of activities of higher risks. This type of approach allows for the efficient and targeted deployment of resources. It also ensures the coverage of the city's most exposed areas. Prochaine diapositive, s'il vous plaît, Carole. Les audits dont cette diapositive fait état ont été approuvés à l'occasion de précédentes réunions du comité de la vérification et se déroulent présentement. Ces vérifications devraient faire l'objet d'un rapport du comité de la vérification cet automne. Le rapport sur la vérification de logements communautaires d'Ottawa sera d'abord déposé auprès du conseil d'administration et sera transmis pour information au comité de la vérification en 2022. The audits listed on this slide were approved at previous audit committee meetings and are currently underway. These audits are expected to be reported to the audit committee this fall, with the exception of the Ottawa Community Housing Audit Report, which will first be reported back to the Ottawa Community Housing Board of Directors and provided for information purposes to the audit committee in early 2022. Prochaine diapositive, s'il vous plaît. The audits listed on this slide are before the committee for approval. The first 2 audits listed are the audit of competitive procurement process and the audit of grants and contributions. We anticipate these audits to be reported back to the audit committee this November. The latter 2 audits that we are going to discuss in more detail will be reported back to the committee in 2022 and future years. The prevention of workplace violence and harassment is currently top of mind for all levels of government across all industries. So we have identified this item as an audit, as a potential area for audit, as we want to ensure that the city has established and consistently implements policies and processes that foster a workplace that is free of violence and harassment, and that city staff feel safe coming forward with allegations of this nature should they arise. The last audit on this slide that you see is that of a pandemic response audit. You'll also note that it's identified as a multi-phased audit. But we anticipate, obviously, that there are many areas within how the city responded to the pandemic. And as such, we'd like to dive into a few of these areas. I would, however, like to emphasize that while the review of the city's response to the pandemic is a very key area for us to review, we will be refraining from commencing any work in this area until we believe the pandemic is in a controlled state for the city. We do not want to interfere in the city's ability to deliver the very important services to its residents. As such, I do not anticipate our office commencing any work in this area until either later this year or early 2022. The scope of these audits have yet to be determined. We will do so closer to the commencement of the audit based on identified risks. Prochaine diapositive, s'il vous plaît, Carole. In addition to the previously mentioned audits, our office will continue to be responsible for the administration of the city's fraud and waste hotline, which is available for employees and the public as part of the city's fraud and waste policy. Our office will review issues raised through the hotline and will present the reports of those reviews and investigations to the audit committee and to council. The 2020 annual fraud and waste hotline report is scheduled to be tabled at our next meeting in May. Larger investigations may also arise as a result of complaints raised through the fraud and waste hotline or through the conduct of approved audits. Based on available resources, we will conduct follow-up procedures to ensure that recommendations made in previously issued reports and action plans developed by management are implemented in a reasonable time frame. The fourth item on this slide you'll see is that of an external quality assurance review. This was the topic of one of the items that was previously put through, item number 1. And perhaps maybe I can just give a little bit of context to the listeners with regards to this. The Institute of Internal Audit, which is the standards by which the Office of the Auditor General has to abide by, requires that an audit function complete an external assessment at least every 5 years. So in accordance with a motion passed by Council in December, and in alignment with these standards, the office will be hiring an external firm to conduct this assessment. Lastly, our team leverages the assistance of external consultants to assist in the execution of our work plan. We currently are working off of a 5-year standing offer, which expires next year. As such, we will work with the Chief Procurement Officer in launching a request for proposal and establishing a new standing offer. Prochaine diapositive, s'il vous plaît, Carole. The audit work plan that we just discussed was based on what we believe to be some of the key areas of risk that the office can address with the available resources at our disposal, while allowing us to be agile and responding to new and emerging risks. Listed here are other areas that are being considered, either for review should the time permit this year or in the coming year or two. And so these areas include equity, diversity, and inclusion, progress in implementing sustainable development strategies, integrated risk management, the quality of asphalt, cybersecurity, selected procurement activities, and lastly, affordable housing. Prochaine diapositive, s'il vous plaît, Carole. Lastly, the Institute of Internal Auditors requires that the Auditor General confirm with management and those charged with oversight the office's conformance with the Code of Ethics and Standards. Therefore, I would like to confirm with the members of the committee and the city manager that the Office of the Auditor General staff have observed the Code of Ethics of the Institute of Internal Auditors and have applied and upheld the principles of integrity, objectivity, confidentiality, and competency. The staff have also abided by the Employee Code of Conduct for the City of Ottawa. In order for us to state full compliance with the standards, we will require successful completion of the upcoming quality assurance review being conducted this year that we just discussed. In addition to our conformance standard, I'd like to raise to the committee areas of continuous improvement that the team is working on. The office has developed a quality assurance and improvement program that supports the delivery of high quality and timely auditing activities in an effective and efficient manner. In the coming year, we will report back to committee on key items such as independence, compliance with the standards, evaluation of stakeholders, relationships, and additional performance metrics. Prochaine diapositive, s'il vous plaît. Cela conclut ma présentation. Merci beaucoup de votre attention. Ça me fera plaisir de répondre à vos questions. Thank you.
Merci, Madame la Vérificatrice Générale. Thank you very much, Madam Auditor General. Guys, to members of the committee, and I got knocked off the internet right when I was introducing item 3. On the presentation by the Auditor General, Councillor Kavanagh, please.
Thank you very much, bienvenue, Nathalie. It's great to have you here. I appreciate some of the objectives that you have for the future, particularly on the equity. I think that a lot of people think that audit is about number crunching, that it's about making sure that we've spent our money well, and that of course can be a function, but it also can be about meeting our objectives. And I think that that's really important, especially since we're near the beginning of the process of setting up offices in that for that purpose, on gender equity and inclusion. So I appreciate that. So that's not till 2022, but in terms of the work that you're working on right now on the harassment in the workplace, I think that that's actually strangely, it leads to that, those are parts of what we have to do. Can you tell me more about the workplace harassment work?
Thank you. Yes, Chair. So obviously we haven't developed a scope for this audit just yet, but what I can definitely state is we'll be looking at the processes, the policies and processes that management has established and how well they are currently implemented. There's also new legislation that's come into play earlier this year. So we want to ensure that the policies and the processes are also updated to reflect that new legislation.
Thank you. What is the scope that you would be looking at? We're a pretty big place here. We're talking beyond just city council, obviously, but are we including police? Are we including firefighters? How far is the scope?
Thank you for your question, Chair. And perhaps maybe I can just give a little clarification with regards to our purview. So, and I'm sure some of these questions may come up down the line as well as, so my purview, the office has purview over city administration. So essentially that includes city staff. So that would be all staff that work under the 9 departments, as well as council support staff. It wouldn't necessarily extend to other organizations unless I am provided with a request from the board in order for us to take a look a little deeper.
Thank you, because you are looking, well, you are started a report on Ottawa community housing. Not for harassment, I mean, you are doing an audit on that, and which is a pretty big place. So you could possibly do like one on OPS, for example, if you were asked.
So thank you for your question, Chair. Under the Auditor General bylaw, there's actually 2 municipal organizations that we do not require additional permission to perform audit work on, and that would be Ottawa Community Housing, as well as the holding company for Hydro Ottawa. With regards to OPS, OPL, and OPH, we would require a written request from the board of directors and then subsequent approval from the audit committee. But we would definitely be open to doing work in any of those areas.
Okay, thank you. I think it's just good to know what's going on out there. In terms of Ottawa Community Housing, I'm on the board for that. You know, full disclosure. So, so very interested in what you'd be looking at. I understand it's for procurement, for like what the new buildings, et cetera. Is that correct?
Thank you, Chair. So our scope for that audit is we are actually just commencing it. We've had to put a pause on it due to the pandemic and also just a little giving management over at OCH a little bit of leeway and breathing room, as they do have a lot of projects currently underway. So we will be looking at the procurement and project management with regards to their new development, knowing that the city is looking at continuing to further provide, in some cases, OCH with additional housing functions to continue to develop. We thought that this would be a very pertinent area for us to review. Okay,
but it's not the. I think that people think that audit is like, you know, chasing something that doesn't appear correct. But is it which I don't think is the case but what is the point for, what is the goal in this case for OCH?
Chair, so with regards to the scope and the objective of these audits is we're firstly looking at ensuring that they have appropriate processes in place in order to fulfill their development strategies. And so I think that's really the key goal is, as you mentioned, when it comes to audit, we're not necessarily just looking at how taxpayer dollars are being spent, were they spent well? It's more so, do they necessarily have the right processes in place in order to ensure that they're going to be able to meet some of the key items within their development strategy for the city?
Okay. Well, thank you very much, and welcome, and look forward to continuing to work with you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Councillor Kavanagh, and you're absolutely right, Councillor Kavanagh, with the distinction that you were making. Auditing is not simply about financial statement auditing what was reported. Any auditor wants to make sure that the statements that they're signing off on are relevant and reliable and reflective of the reality. But the important work of the Auditor General is beyond that scope, and I don't want to speak for her, but as an accountant, it is certainly with respect to the objectives, whether an organization, a department, has attained the objectives that were given to it by council, by the administration, and whether they have attained those with respect to their contracts or their strategies, and to be able to comment on that. Always, as the Auditor General had said earlier, always with the objective of council being accountable to itself and to its commitments to the residents of the city. So thank you very much for those questions, and Madam Auditor General. And I see, welcome, Councillor Menard. You had a question for the Auditor General.
Thanks very much, Chair, and nice to be here. I'm not on the committee, but I just wanted to welcome Nathalie to first audit committee since coming on board. So congratulations, and looking forward to working with you. I just had a couple of questions about the audits that are going to be commencing in 2021 and early 2022. For the pandemic response audit, when would it normally be reported back on it? If it starts in, say, late 2021 or early 2022, would it be reported back on before the fall of 2022, or when would it normally happen?
Thank you, Councillor. Chair, I don't want to commit ourselves to something that we won't be able to stand by just because we haven't determined what areas we're going to look at or our start date. But what I'd like to state is what we are aiming for is for much timelier reporting back to committee. So if we were to say start something late fall, I would hope to be able to report back by the following fall as well. But it depends what areas we choose to look at and how large our scope is.
Okay, okay, that's helpful. And then with regard to the audit of the competitive procurement process, there's two council priorities we're going to be that are linked there. One is the environmental stewardship, and the other is our sustainable infrastructure piece. Will this audit take into account procurement processes that went outside of our procurement bylaw as well, or is it just going to be looking at audits that use the actual bylaw itself? Because we've had some that have gone outside of that, and I just want to know if we're going to be looking at those as well.
Chair, we haven't determined the scope of this item yet. We'll be doing so in May. However, I would presume that it may very well encompass both. Okay.
Okay. Thank you so much, Madam Auditor General. Really appreciate those answers and you being on board. And thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Back to you.
Thank you, Councillor Menard. Did any other members of the committee or council, if any are present, have any questions? Any further questions? Seeing none, on item 3, that the Audit Committee recommend Council approve the Office of the Auditor General's 2021 Interim Audit Work Plan. Is this item carried?
Okay.
Carried.
Carried. Thank you very much. On to item number 4, the Office of the Auditor General report on audit follow-ups, Bureau de la Vérificatrice Générale, le rapport sur les suivis de la vérification. And first, I would ask Vice Chair Meehan to please put forward a motion with respect to adding the report to the agenda, please.
Thank you. So the Office of the Auditor General report on audit follow-ups, portions of the follow-up to the 2015 Audit of Information Technology Security Incident Handling and Response included in this report was not circulated with the agenda package. Therefore, be it resolved that the Audit Committee approve the addition of this document for consideration by the committee at today's meeting pursuant to section 89.3 of the procedure bylaw, being bylaw number 2021-24.
Thank you very much. I think later on we will be putting forward a motion with respect to the in-camera portion. But I will ask, I believe the Auditor General has a presentation. Would you go ahead, Madame?
Just before that, Chair, if you could approve the motion, please.
Carried.
Oh, I apologize. Is that motion by the Vice Chair carried, please?
Carried.
Thank you, Carole.
Merci.
And presentation by the Auditor General.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Carole, si tu peux partager la présentation, s'il vous plaît. Merci beaucoup. So the next item on the agenda is for us to walk you through the results of our audit follow-up procedures that have been conducted since last September. Prochaine diapositive, s'il vous plaît. Mes collègues et moi souhaitons exprimer notre gratitude au directeur municipal, à la direction et au personnel de la ville pour leur collaboration et leur aide soutenue. J'aimerais aussi remercier mon équipe qui fait partie le vérificateur général adjoint, Ed Miner, vérificatrice principale, Sarah Parr, Louise Proux et Margaret Sue, ainsi que notre vérificateur, Marlene Perez. My colleagues and I wish to express our appreciation for the continued cooperation and assistance afforded to us by the Office of the City Manager, Management and Staff. Prochaine diapositive, s'il vous plaît. I will now pass the presentation on to Deputy Auditor General Ed Miner.
Mr. Chair, in this presentation, I'll be addressing the OAG's follow-up process, why it's important. After that, I'll cover the audits for which our follow-up procedures were performed and the results. And then finally, I'll go over our overall conclusions. Next slide, please. In recent years, the OAG has conducted follow-up procedures 2 to 3 years after each audit's completion. This presentation is not going to provide a detailed discussion of each of the individual recommendations. It is our overall evaluation of the progress to date. Should members of the committee wish more details in any specific follow-up, separate reports on each follow-up are now available online. Next slide, please. The OAG adheres to the Institute of Internal Auditors standards by performing follow-up audit procedures. Follow-up audit procedures help to evaluate the adequacy, effectiveness, and timeliness of the actions taken by management in response to our recommendations. This evaluation ensures that the required measures committed to by management and approved by council have been implemented. Next slide, please. Today we are presenting 8 follow-up reports. For 4 of these audits, this was the first time that we have followed up on the recommendations. And for 4 of these audits, it's the second time. The audits for which this is the first follow-up are the audit of IT remote access, the audit of the regulatory framework for LRT, the audit of the social housing registry, the review of the city's practices for the procurement of commercial vehicles, and the audits for which this is our second follow-up are the audit of the Human Resources Master Plan, the audit of IT governance, the audit of IT risk management, and the audit of IT security incident handling and response. Next slide, please. The OAG assessed the completion of the recommendations using the following categories: complete, partially complete, and not started. We found in this case that the vast majority, 82% of the recommendations, were assessed as being complete, and most of the others, 16%, were assessed as being partially complete. But we should note that 6 of the 8 recommendations that were partially complete have remained outstanding after 2 rounds of follow-up. And we found 1 recommendation that had not been started. Next slide, please. This chart shows the recommendation implementation percentages from 2018 to 2021. The vast majority of the recommendations, 95% on average, were assessed as being complete, and that's the blue columns, or partially complete, that's the orange columns. On average, only 2% of the recommendations were assessed as being not started. Next slide, please. All recommendations for these audits were complete based on our follow-up procedures. There was the 2015 audit of IT risk management, the 2017 audit of IT remote access, the 2017 audit of the regulatory framework for LRT, and the 2018 review of the city's commercial practices for the procurement of commercial vehicles. And in keeping with past practice, we aren't going to be going into the details of these follow-ups because all of the recommendations were implemented. Next slide, please. This is the, now we're talking about the follow-up to the 2015 follow-up of the 2011 audit of Human Resource Master Plan. In 2015, it was determined that of the 9 recommendations, 4 were partially complete and 3 had not been started. Our review has now found that management has completed 4 of the remaining 7 recommendations. While we found 3 recommendations to be partially complete, we noted that plans are in place to address these recommendations. One of these relate to the need for HR to provide an approach to medium and long-term workforce planning that is applied in all city departments. While the implementation is not yet complete, we noted that plans are in place to address the recommendations through the implementation of the Thriving Workforce Roadmap and Action Plan. That's an HR's plan. They call it the Thriving Workforce and Roadmap Action Plan. Oh, sorry, Thriving Workforce Roadmap and Action Plan. That's what it is. The Workforce Planning Initiative within this plan is expected to analyze, forecast, and plan workforce supply and demand, address gaps, and determine talent requirements for the city. The second partially complete recommendation relates to departments taking ownership for the development of their midterm and long-term workforce plans. The Thriving Workforce Plan, as previously mentioned, will provide strategic direction that can be tailored to meet the needs of each department. The Workforce Planning Initiative, the way it's set up, is owned by city departments, but it's driven by HR. The third partially complete recommendation relates to the need to develop a metrics framework for workforce planning. Currently, talent scorecards don't have targets that departments are measured against, as they have not yet been developed. Management has indicated that a review and possible enhancement of the talent scorecard will be made, and it will include the addition of departmental targets. Overall, we're satisfied with management's action plans and believe that implementation of the Thriving Workforce Roadmap and Action Plan will fully address the partially complete recommendations. Next slide, please. This was a follow-up to the 2018 follow-up of the 2015 audit of IT governance. In 2018, it was determined that of the 9 audit recommendations, 4 were complete and 5 were partially complete. So in 2020, we followed up on these remaining 5 recommendations, and we found that 4 of them have been now completed. The one partially completed recommendation relates to the need for an effective CIO succession plan to be implemented once a new CIO has been retained. Now, the acting CIO has been in this role for 2 years and is planning to, and the plans are for him to remain in this role for the immediate future. Although management has indicated that a succession plan was in place for the CIO, documentation supporting this plan was limited. Although we would like to have seen this area addressed, we are generally satisfied with management progress in addressing the major risk areas in this audit. Next slide, please. This is a second follow-up to the 2015 audit of IT security handling and response. Security incident handling and response, sorry. Of the 5 recommendations from the earlier follow-up, 2 remain partially complete. Due to the risks to the city's IT infrastructure that could result from this information being disclosed publicly, the details on this report can only be presented in camera. Next slide, please. We followed up on the recommendations that we made in the 2017 audit of the Social Housing Registry. We found that management had completed 3 of the 6 recommendations. We found that 2 of the recommendations were partially complete. One of them relates to the implementation of an alternative process for the protection of data on the central waiting list. The original audit found that weekly backups of the central waiting list were being stored off-site. However, these backups were not encrypted while being physically transported by registry staff. Our follow-up found that while the registry has improved its interim procedures to back up and archive the data, these measures do not fully address the privacy of the information subject to compromise. We expect that this will be addressed once a new centralized system is implemented. The second partially complete recommendation relates to updating the city's service manager policy and procedure manual to ensure that the roles and responsibilities align with provincial requirements. At the time of our audit, both the city's service manager policy and procedure manual and the registry service agreement were outdated. That's the agreement between the city and the social housing registry. Our follow-up found that management has not updated the manual, and we're waiting for the province to develop and release new regulations in early 2022 before doing so. Lastly, we found that the recommendation that the city formalize processes to assess the registry's compliance with the registry service agreement was not started. The original audit found the city did not have formal processes to ensure the registry complied with the registry service agreement, and our follow-up found no formal review process has been implemented. We appreciate that while the talks with the registry to come up with a new agreement have stalled, or at least they had at the time of our follow-up last year, and that the province is updating regulations for this sector, we still believe that there is a risk that exists if city staff don't have a process in place to verify the registry's compliance. Next slide, please. Overall, follow-up procedures are required by audit standards and are an important part of the audit process. They confirm management's commitments are being fulfilled. These results are the last ones of our follow-up procedure that we reported using this current process. As was set out earlier in our meeting this morning, together with management, the OAG is implementing a new approach to follow-ups. The OAG will provide a semi-annual report on the audit procedures performed on previously issued audit recommendations that have come due, as opposed to issuing individual reports for each area of follow-up. Management will continue to track their progress and work with the OAG to review the status of recommendations once the previously agreed implementation date has been reached, instead of waiting 2 to 3 years to commence our follow-up work in this area. The new process will provide assurance to the audit committee and to council, allowing them to provide their oversight responsibilities and create efficiencies for both city administration and for the OAG. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. That concludes our presentation on these follow-ups.
Mr. Miner, thank you very much. Nice to see you again. Thank you for the presentation. Merci énormément. And so I will remind members of the committee that the IT security incident report, we will be going in camera for those questions. But on the others, we have general managers available with respect to the Human Resources Master Plan. Ms. Turner, the general manager, along with her colleagues, Ms. Marland and Ms. Branchot, are available. With respect to the IT, audits. There are three. The CIA, Chief Information Officer, Mr. Carlucci, is available, and Ms. Turner, also the General Manager responsible for that department, is available. With respect to the Social Housing Registry, Ms. Gray, Donna Gray, General Manager, along with her colleagues, Ms. Goodfellow and Madame Boulanger, are available. With respect to light rail transit, Mr. Manconi, I understand, is available, and Mr. Brandon Richards. And with respect to the city practices on the procurement of commercial vehicles, again, Ms. Turner is here. And so on those audits, if there are questions, I will look to members of the committee, and I believe the Vice Chair was first up with her questions. You are on mute, Caroline. There you go.
Thank you. I want to thank the Audit Committee for all their work on these audits. I can't help but notice that one of the follow-up audits is on an audit that was done at the original audit 10 years ago in 2011. That's the Human Resources Master Plan, and still 10 years later, only 4 of the 7 recommendations that were issued in that report have been implemented. I guess my first question is, why does management and the Auditor General staff what are they actually disagreeing on there? What on the work plan?
And thank you, Councillor, for the question. Actually, we do agree with the Auditor General's recommendations regarding all nine recommendations. I just want to say the organization have actually vastly changed over the past 10 years. And we have made our focus really the past few years has been on succession management. We saw that as a huge risk for the organization. We've developed comprehensive succession management plans for our GM positions, for our director positions, and now we are embarking on the actual management positions. We have identified the Workforce Plan Initiative as part of our Thriving Workforce Strategic Plan. We plan on embarking on this during this term of council. We're very anxious to get that work started. We were delayed as part of our response to the pandemic, but we're very, very anxious to get started on the workforce planning component.
Okay, but the pandemic started in 2020.
Right. Again, we have made success on. We have implemented 6 of those 9 actual recommendations. We did change focus again and we really concentrated on the succession plans for our GMs and directors. We also embarked on what we call developing our people, where we develop comprehensive leadership, development plans over the past few years. So we did make significant progress on really supporting our people, but again, we plan on really comprehensively addressing this over the next during this term of council.
I guess I mean on the completion status, Ms. Marland, there seems to be a discrepancy there. I'm just wondering, in 10 years after recommendations brought in, it just seems to me, I can't really figure out why 10 years later this is just not complete. And I guess I have a question for the Auditor General. If this were the private sector, Ms. Auditor General, where you came from, 10 years after an original audit, if you only had 4 of 7 recommendations complete, what would your reaction be?
Well, Mr. Chair, I guess what I can say is what we've proposed and has been approved today with regards to change in the process will help, I think, really ensure that all the action plans are implemented in a timely manner. We will be reviewing management action plans as they come due. In the past, our process was to review these items as all recommendations in an audit had come due. In some cases, that could be 3 or 4 years down the road. When having this new process, having us come in real time as they are accomplished, will help management keep those top of mind. And I think that's one of the key items we have. If I'm being very candid, we always prioritize what is top of mind and what is, a key priority, what's coming due. And so I think if we help keep that focus, we help management keep the focus there, we're going to see things start changing. And what I do want to give management credit for is our last report on follow-up procedures had a 56% completion rate. We now have an 82% completion rate, which is the highest that has occurred in the past 4 years. So I do want to give credit where credit is due, but I do agree that there's still much progress that can be made. And I do want to thank management and the CMO's office for working with us, because we are working on a new process and they're being very open to it. And so I just wanted to say thank you from that perspective. I hope that answers your question, Councillor.
I would just ask then, so all the outstanding recommendations that were on the follow-up audits that were tabled there today. So do you have a definitive deadline then on when these should be done? Like, you don't want to be looking at these again in four years, do you?
No, and so as we noted in our summary report, with the exception of the items that we are going to be discussing in camera, we will not be performing any more follow-up in these areas. And the reason is what we refer to as residual risk. The steps that management have taken have significantly reduced the risk in this area. So we have chosen not to do any more follow-up work. We want to ensure that we are focusing our efforts on the areas that are going to be of most value to committee and council.
Okay, so just one last question, if I may. So most of the follow-up audits, usually 3 to 4 years after the original audit. Ideally, what should that time frame be? For when you issue a new your recommendations in an audit, say let's say this fall, a new audit. How long before you'd like to see those recommendations implemented and the follow-up audit be issued?
Chair, I think it depends on the recommendation that's made. So we can have some recommendations that could be very easy to implement. If we ask you to quickly update a process because you don't have an owner of that process, for example, that's something that should be turned around prior to us even coming to report it to committee. That being said, there are some recommendations that can take a lot of time and can have multiple steps to them. So I think what we will do is work with management on identifying those longer term recommendations and perhaps having milestones to ensuring that they're going to be on track to complete them.
Okay, I look forward to that. Thank you very much, Madam AG. Thanks.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. And let me just say before we go to Councillor El-Shantiri, Madam Vice Chair, I couldn't agree with you more. You know, we know that we've just put in a new process, and those outstanding recommendations, you and I in the motion, we're going to be following up on those, and I commit to the residents of the City of Ottawa that we're going to do so. You know, we've heard, with respect to the 10 years, we've heard from the city manager throughout the pandemic, and he is absolutely right. Our strength is our people. The delivery of services in a pandemic or otherwise is our people, and the people who work for the City of Ottawa are outstanding. It is up to management to ensure that the succession plans, the master plan is in place and is effective, and it's to the expectations of the residents of the city. It's a big expense item, and it's how we deliver services. And I hope that message is crystal clear to the general managers and to the human resources. Thank you for allowing me to say that. Councillor El-Shantiri, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Ed, for your follow-up on all these audits. Got my attention on a commercial vehicle, Mr. Miner, and on a commercial vehicle audit. Can staff tell us what measure we have now is going to, be a safeguard? So based on the audit recommendation, would that be Valerie? Or okay,
Mr. Chair, both the Canadian Free Trade Agreement and the City of Ottawa's procurement bylaw allows for the identification of brand names in procurement processes. Excuse me. What was missing in the audit, or what was identified as missing in the audit, was the detailed business case that would underlay that. We now have a new procedure that identifies how the use of brand names needs to be included in these procurements, and that's been underway, and that's what the Auditor General had found in identifying that the audit had been completed.
And Mr. McDonald, you know, this issue was on for quite some time and got quite a bit of media attention. So do we have what would it take for future a safeguard to deal with this item?
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Okay, it's good to hear. Obviously, my question to the Auditor General. So, in other municipality the size of Ottawa, whether bigger or smaller, what is the percentage of the compliance from management? And I'm interested to know, like when you say, you know, some of our file 82%, is that 82% high number, low number? We need to do more about it. Is there a feedback on what's best practice right across the province or across the country?
Thank you, Chair. Unfortunately, I wouldn't be able to speak to a specific percentage or a specific number. I can assure you that there are always some issues with regards to getting 100% completion rate within the agreed upon time frame. And I think the reason for that is twofold. Sometimes management will bring forth an implementation date that may be a little too eager. And second of all, there are sometimes other priorities that come up which tend to push back some of these action items. That being said, as I mentioned in my previous response to Vice Chair Meehan, is our new process will hope to continue to put the emphasis on the areas of high risk to ensure that we are getting timely responses.
I see the city manager pop up on the screen. You're on mute, Mr. Kanalakis. You're still on mute, Steve.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Councillor. Sorry, I couldn't find my little yellow hand. I just, I recognize that we're focused in on, a few recommendations that, are late or have been of issue that have been raised. But I want to remind, and I do this seems every time we have follow-up audits committee, that since 2005, we've had 2,529 audit recommendations from the Auditor General's office. And of those, 96% are implemented or tracking on time. So we're dealing with 4% of audit recommendations of 2,529. So I think we're doing quite well. There's some reasons, and I appreciate our AG, Ms. Goujon, for commenting. And we've had this discussion where I think the challenge for us is sometimes we're a little too optimistic in terms of when we put the timelines for it to be finished. Sometimes we underestimate how much work will be done. And as she told me, and I completely agree, and I think it's a belief I hold, it's sometimes, and she mentioned it in her comments, is that sometimes people focus on what's at the top of mind, and as time passes, if we're not on it, and that's why I'm so hopeful for this new process, people focus on other things. And HR, for instance, has been focusing very much on succession planning, on our new development program. Since I got here 5 years ago, I've made a commitment to council to change our training structure, to be more experiential learning, to give people stretch assignments, to move people into other roles, to have associate GMs. We're moving into associate directors. I'm even moving some GMs up into be associate city managers. I'll be announcing that to council soon. So HR has been very active in the last 5 years, transforming our organization to get our people opportunities. So I think the new process, which our new AG has brought forward, and I welcomed and I thought was refreshing, is going to tackle this problem head on in terms of ensuring we hit the milestones. But the context is important. 96% of 2,529 recommendations have been completed or on time. And I think that's a good track record in any department, to tell you the truth. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Kanalakis, for this information. But I believe we all know, Mr. Chair, is what, we could have 99% completion, but the 1% or the one issue where the community been brought attention to can really be at play. And you remember in the past when we dramatized somebody drove in the lawnmower down the stairs only to find out there was nothing, nothing true about this. But what I'm saying, sometimes when audit comes in, it seems some people think they create some drama about it. But what I'm interested again in the commercial vehicle, and Mr. McDonald, we heard in the past some company didn't fulfill their commitment or their agreement with the city, and then they establish another Ontario Inc. number, and then they come back again so they don't go on a blacklist. Is there's an effort to make stop of these abuse of the system? Like I know you worked so hard to identify a group that didn't qualify to apply for a city job next time, but then they changed the Ontario Inc. and they came back again. And I think we talked about this in the past. Is there's a way we can invest a little bit more effort to find out about this practice?
So, Mr. Chair, this is unrelated to the audit of the procurement of commercial vehicles, but what I would mention is that the definition of supplier performance under the procurement bylaw applies to not only the company, but their directors and any associated companies as well. And so in the instance where a company was barred from doing business with the city, were they to create a new company and attempt to get business with the city, that bidding prohibition would apply to them as well.
It's good to hear. I know it's not part of the audit, but also it's a loophole. We heard about it in the past and we reported. So, but thank you for clarifying this, Mr. McDonald. Thank you, Mr. Chair. That's my question.
Thank you, Councillor El-Shantiri. Councillor Kavanagh, please.
Thank you, Chair, very much. Thank you, Ms. Boujan, for the work that you've done so far. I'm interested in the HR in the sense that in what you've said you're wanting to do in next steps. You talked about the about gender equity and inclusion as being a topic, and I can't help but wonder how the findings and the follow-up in the HR report would blend into this, because obviously that's where the work is going to get done, is in HR. And we've got to have really good system in place for tracking and making sure equity is present at all times. So how do these blend together?
Chair, so as we previously mentioned, we will not be doing any additional follow-up on these current HR items that were just discussed. With regards to future audits, we will be obviously working with management as we issue future recommendations. We'll be working with them to determine the most appropriate timeframe in order for them to implement their action plans, and we'll be following up on them as they come due. What you will see going forward is our audit reports are really going to be focusing on the key risks. So areas that are of lower risk, we are looking to provide what is called a management letter to management. So I think I gave an example of a process or a policy document not having an owner, for example. That's very low risk and not something that I believe requires the audit committee's attention. So going forward, our reports are going to focus on the high risk areas, the areas that we want management to address in an extremely timely manner. So going back to that new process, it's really going to be looking at them as they come due. And obviously anything that comes from the equity, diversity, and inclusion audit that we decide to scope, any issues that arise from it will be followed up in a timely manner, as all future audits will be.
So has the work that has been done on HR and the follow-up prepared HR for the next steps in taking on equity?
I don't think I'd be in a position to answer that question. I think we'd actually have to review what they currently have from a plan perspective and audit that plan and the implementation of that plan in order to be able to give you a good answer.
Okay, I think Ms. Marlin, if she doesn't mind answering,
And as we know, Councillor Kavanaugh, it is part of the work plan that was presented by the Auditor General. But if Ms. Marlin wants to simply comment on that, I would welcome that.
Yes, and just HR has been partnering with our colleagues in community and social services. There's the new service that has been established there, which is under the under the management of Donna Gray, and we've been working very closely to review all of our HR policies, our recruitment practices, to eliminate any systemic barriers, and to really ensure that our policies and practices enable us to have a diverse workforce that represents the city that we serve. So we are actively working with our colleagues in community social services.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. In terms of the social registry, my concern is going forward in terms of our clients that use this system. Were they at any time, were their names lost, or was there any issues with anything detrimental to our clients? And going forward, has this been resolved? I guess that's my top concern when we have such a registry.
I can just clarify on the results of our work. We didn't come across any instance where the information on the people on the registry waiting list were divulged or provided or not being being exposed. What we found was that there was still a risk in that area, and that's what we're highlighting. But we had not we're not aware of any incident of them being exposed.
Okay, so it was all risk, but nothing had happened. No incidents.
That is correct.
Okay, or duplication and making it so that made the list longer or anything like that.
Although we didn't cover that in our follow-up audit back when we did the original audit of the registry, we did look at the number of the makeup of the list, and it's we didn't find individuals being on that list more than once. I'm sort of top of my head. I don't recall that any problems in that area. What we did find, and perhaps what wasn't fully, I think wasn't fully enunciated at the time, was that there were people who were in social housing that were on the list again to move to more appropriate housing. So being a larger unit or a smaller unit. Yep. And so they appear on the list as well, even though again, I think didn't really come up in our follow-up procedures. But that's my recollection of that audit.
Okay. Thank you very much. Well,
thank you, Councillor Kavanaugh. Councillor Hubley, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Just following up on that follow-up audit on the registry, Ed. The original intent here was to try to get to make sure that the registry was working, because it was a joint partnership exercise with the province, but it was also to try to validate the information that's on there. And I think that's a little bit about what Councillor Kavanaugh was getting at there. Is there's a lot of us are curious why that number never really changes a lot year to year. What makes up that 10,000 that's on the registry? Like, how many are people that are actually in housing now, but maybe it could be a family that the kids have grown and left the house, and so the mother or father is still there with 3-bedroom housing, but it's just them and they're looking to downsize. Or it could be a case of families looking to upsize. We needed to get a picture of what that was, because right now that 10,000, you think it's 10,000 people sitting on the street waiting to get housing, and it's really not. So can you just elaborate on that? Was that looked at any further in the follow-up as to what makes up that 10,000?
I must say it was part of the original audit, but the follow-up was really just on the recommendations that we identified. So we didn't revisit that to see what the status is and what the numbers are looking like now. So we don't we didn't, in this follow-up, we didn't really get into that other than, again, the specific recommendations that we made to try to improve the operations. And that's all we focused on in this follow-up. I'm not sure if anyone from housing might be able to provide a little more information.
Well, it wasn't really housing that was looking into that list to validate it. And I know there wasn't a lot of detail in the original audit that came out, so I expected some of that to come out through follow-ups. And now you're saying that it wasn't looked at in the follow-ups either. So maybe we're going to have to look at getting that added back onto the work plan to have a more detailed review of exactly what makes up that list and how do you get on it, and more importantly, how do you get off of it.
Councillor Hubley, I'll just remind members of the committee that some of the elements of the scope of the original audit, which was in 2017, was, as Councillor Kavanagh said, ensuring the protection of applicant information, the effectiveness of that list, the compliance with the regulations, and the maintenance of that central waiting list. And I don't have the information in front of me with how the recommendations that were put forth. There were 6 of them. To what elements of those findings, to what elements of those findings those recommendations applied. I do understand what you're saying with respect to making sure that the centralized waiting list reflects the reality of those persons that are getting on and off. And if the recommendations that you followed up on, Mr. Minor, is that what they related to, the maintenance of the centralized waiting list, or were they other aspects?
It was, to be honest, it was more of the other aspects, Chair. There were recommendations on, I think that addressed some of the ideas on some of the items to improve the maintenance of that wait list, but we didn't really find a lot of issues with the accuracy of the data on that list. Back, if I recall, back in our original audit, it was accurate. It was more procedures to try to improve the processes that were used. But again, when we did our detailed testing and went back to the actual applicant files and things like that to find out who was on the list and the processes for getting people off the list, we didn't find a lot of problems in that area. Again, we had 6 recommendations to try to improve things, but the actual numbers was not an area of where we found problems.
Okay, that would go to the effectiveness of the list is what I'm trying to get at here. So you're saying you never found any examples of that, and therefore that's why you're not doing any follow-up.
Correct.
It's just a fluke that number stays basically the same year to year.
Yeah, there's actually a fair, again, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but there's a fair number of, fair bit of churn going on and off of that list. We seem around, at the time it was 14,000. We have, people coming off, and then we have people coming on, but it always seems to balance out around that area, or it did at the time.
Okay, because I recall at the start we heard a number, something like a third of the list was, as I described, people that have housing but were looking to either upgrade or downgrade their housing. So, but we didn't get into that, is basically what you're telling me.
Well, if I recall in the audit, we did identify that was the case and that could be better reported, but those numbers are, the registry does make those figures available. It's not because often people only report on the top number, the 14,000, and they don't get into the details of the report, where that is disclosed, or at least I believe it was at the time.
Okay.
Councillor Hubley, I see Ms. Goodfellow has turned on her video. Would you like to hear from her with respect to your specific question?
Sure, and then I want to move on. I have one more question.
Thank you. Ms. Goodfellow.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. With regards to the numbers on the wait list, I understand, and it has been a point of discussion over the years. Currently, the way the legislation related to social housing stands, anyone who wants to move to a different RGI unit, so even if they are already receiving RGI and RGI subsidy, by legislation, they must go back on the wait list and put their name up for an appropriate sized unit, whether it be larger or smaller. So it does complicate matters. Totally agree with that. With the new legislation that's coming into place related to Bill 184, there is the option for service managers of the city to look at an alternate process related to those that are already housed versus those that do not receive any housing benefit. And we certainly will be, as the regulations are refined and defined over the next year or so, we will actually be looking at that. Agree that that is an opportunity to further explore and better define what that wait list describes. But currently, there's no option. It's a legislative requirement that people must be on it.
Okay, it almost sounds like it might be worthwhile to have two lists, because to me, what council, I really wish Councilor McKenney was on this call, because I'd like to get her insight into this. But to me, we're looking for people that don't have housing, that we want to try to find housing for, I would think would be the higher priority than trying to move somebody around that has existing housing but just wants to improve it a bit.
And Councillor Hubley, that is an excellent conversation to have. I don't know if it's in the context of the recommendations and the implementation of the recommendations from 2017. It's perhaps a community and protective services discussion.
Okay, so my next question on the changes to the follow-ups that the AG was referring to, the change in number to reach 80%, was that as a result of recommendations being completed, or was it a result of reviewing the recommendations and changing how your office looks at those recommendations to say that, okay, now they're completed because you view them as a lower risk?
Chair, so the new process is not reflected in any of the results that were reported today. They are part of the old process that was performed by my predecessor. So there was no additional lens put to them with regards to a risk assessment. It was whether or not they were complete or not. So that 82% is 82 fully completed recommendations.
Okay, 82 fully completed recommendations last year. So, and then you'll report on what you achieved this year.
Yes, so going forward, I'll be reporting back to committee twice a year, and I believe our first report will be coming to committee in September.
Perfect. Okay, thank you. That's all I had, Mr. Chair. Oh, sorry, if I may. One more question on this risk piece, Madam Auditor General. When you were defining lower risk items, one of the things that came to my mind was we dealt a lot with cash shortages at the city. There was an example of an audit a couple of years back where they found $20 missing. Now, that could be considered low risk because the amount is only $20, but the way I looked at it at the time was, okay, we have an issue with a process in cash handling. We've managed to identify this time that's $20 missing, but we had no way to know if $1 million was missing over the last 2 years or not, or could this be testing the system so that $1 million does go missing? So would you consider that missing $20 low risk, or would it be something you would continue to follow up on?
Councillor Hubley, I'm interested in what the Auditor General is going to say about this. I will point out that it is not strictly with respect to these follow-up audits, but it does speak to how she will be dealing with risk and follow-ups in the future. And so if you could give a brief answer, Madam Auditor General.
Absolutely, Chair. For that particular item, I would still consider it high risk. And the reason for that is the control itself. We're looking to ensure that there are controls around cash handling. If they are lacking, while that was, as you mentioned, it was a $20 issue, that was just in what we reviewed. Obviously, these cash handling controls are across the city where cash is utilized. And so I would still consider that one to be a higher risk, and you would see that reported in future.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair. That's all I had.
Thank you, Councillor Hubley. Vice Chair Meehan, you had your hand up. It's down. Did you mean to take it down? You're good? Okay, thank you. So we are on this item, and I just wanted to comment with respect to the city manager, Mr. Kanellakis, who spoke earlier, and I appreciate his commitment to the recommendations that the Auditor General makes. And 96% is a pretty good score, I will say. But I'm sure he will agree with me that we always want to improve. We always want to get to 100% because the recommendations by the Auditor General and her colleagues and her office are very important and seek to improve the processes in the city. And so we always, 96 is good. Let's not settle for 96, let's go for 100. And I will note that his collaboration and his commitment to the new process by the Auditor General so that the recommendations are implemented on the date that is promised by management, or that we know the reasons, that we have a good, frank, and full exchange with respect to the reasons why they might not be. And so I appreciate that very much. We are on item number 4, and we have covered off several of the items, but we have one more. And so now I will ask Vice Chair Meehan to move this meeting into closed session, please.
Let me see where. Therefore, be it resolved that in accordance with Procedure Bylaw 2021-24, the Audit Committee resolve in camera pursuant to subsections 13(1)A, the security of the property of the city, and 13(1)B, personal matters about an identifiable individual, including staff, based upon the rationale set out in the legal implications section of the report titled Office of the Auditor General, Report on Audit Follow-ups, in order to receive from the Auditor General the follow-up of the 2015 Audit of Information Technology Security Incident Handling and Response.
Is that motion carried?
Carried.
Okay.
Thank you. And so we will take 5 minutes to allow members of council, members of committee to leave this Zoom meeting and to join a Microsoft Teams meeting. The link has been sent to you by our committee coordinator, and certainly to allow the clerk staff and any other staff to attend that Teams meeting. And so we will pick this up. Yes.
Chair, will that be sent to other councillors as well? I don't think
members of council are allowed, are welcomed at in-camera meetings, absolutely. And so Carol, if you could send it to Councillor Menard, I would appreciate it very much.
Will do.
Thank you so much. And so we will reconvene at 11 o'clock if we can, in 3 minutes. Let's see if we can do that. Thank you.